Good evening. Welcome to the March 18th, 2019 meeting of the Coeur d'Alene Parks and Recreation Commission meeting. Melissa, will you get us started with roll call, please?
Commissioner Cranston.
Here.
Commissioner McDowell.
Here.
Commissioner Lean. Commissioner Tate.
Here.
Commissioner Hill.
Here.
Commissioner Wood.
Here.
Commissioner Ettinger. Commissioner Kinnard.
Here.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. Being that we have a quorum tonight, we'll move on now to the Pledge of Allegiance. Jenny, if you'll lead the group.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, do any of the commission members tonight have a conflict of interest with any of the agenda items tonight?
None here.
There are none. Okay, we're going to attempt one more time to approve the November 19th, 2018 meeting minutes. Is there any further discussion on the minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Mr. Chair, so moved, and I'll second.
Commissioner Hill moved and Commissioner Wood seconded to approve the November 19th, 2018 meeting minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Bill, you mentioned you're going to forego a staff report tonight, or are you?
Well, yes, that's correct, only in the fact that I wasn't certain what your choices were going to be. So
Okay.
what we're going to do is list our priority, as council gave us that direction from you guys.
Yep.
And the opportunity for the public to weigh in on that as well. So not knowing what the outcome of this meeting would be, I did not put together a staff meeting. So what Melissa and I will do is we will just summarize this with the minutes and then put a memo together to council that
Okay.
they will take on to the Ignite meeting that they're having as a workshop in a few weeks.
Do you have any other items to report on park and rec issues other than the agenda tonight?
Yeah, so just my staff comments about what's going on in the park and rec world.
Okay. Go ahead.
Jocelyn with the Parks Foundation was at our workshop with council the other day, and she sent me an email and just wanted to remind everybody that they're available. For the Parks Foundation can assist with soliciting, marketing, and corporate grants, private donations, and in-kind donations, just as we did for McEwen Park. So she just wanted to extend that to you guys. She wanted to be here tonight, but she's got some family obligations, and so she just wanted to make certain that you were aware that they're there for us and ready to help.
Okay.
We had a snowball fight here at McEwen that went pretty well. Dustin Ainsworth, thanks to him, it was his brainchild. We had about 300 people show up. Everybody had a really good time. We cut a swath in the snow out there to create a safe zone, and everybody was throwing lob shots at each other, and it turned out really well. We didn't break any records, but it was such a success. We're talking about doing it again and maybe making it an annual event. So don't know if we'll ever have snow like this again in March, but it's probably be a moving target because the way we get snow around here, you just never know. So it may have to be at a drop of a hat that the conditions are right and such that we're going to have another big snowball fight. So thanks to Dustin for that.
Cute.
And then on our recreation side, we're just finishing up with spring soccer registration. As of today, we've registered over 600 kiddos for that. And so it's tentatively to start up the first week in April with practices. Again, if the snow's gone, I don't know if it's ever going to go away. Indoor swim lessons are up and running again with almost full registration for the sessions to start in February and runs through March. And we're making a little bit of a change in this. So due to the high demand for indoor swim lessons, it's necessary to limit the oldest age to register as 9. What we're finding is we're having kids that are older that have been in the program long enough, and we really need to get the littler ones kind of in it. At 9 years old, they're already pretty well are drown proof. So we want to get the littler ones into the program. So we have limited time. So our goal is to, again, like I say, get every child an opportunity to be comfortable in the water and learn the basic swim skills. We find most children at that age are ready to just move on to higher advancement. And so, and unfortunately, we are limited, excuse me, in our pool hours, so we must make the best use of our time. And then a new program we're starting this spring called Your Vibrant Family. It's a 4-week spring wellness class designed for anyone who wants to learn how to nurture their whole family with whole foods. So this class will be held at the Jewett House on Thursday morning starting in April. So look for that. That's something that Paula was approached by a gal, and we worked it out with Marla over there, who is our manager at the Jewett House, and we think it's a great fit for it. And finally, believe it or not, adults softball team registration is in full swing. Due to the loss of Memorial Field again this year, the Recreation Department will need to limit the number of teams. So next year we can get the field up and running, and then we'll be able to offer some more programs at that time. And with that, any questions?
Anything for Bill?
Mr. Chair, just a comment, Dustin's a big kid at heart, isn't he?
A very big kid at heart. Yeah, no, he's a
Were
great
you
guy.
down here for-
I got to know him in leadership, so I like him a bunch.
Yeah, he's a good guy. I'm sorry I missed it. I read about it in the paper. It looked like a lot of fun. I was wondering, Bill, when will you be accepting our nominations for the Rock of Fame?
Well, it's this time of year, and I think that you, we had chatted before about this. We had a couple that were slated on the board, and there was going to be some motion with you guys on who you thought it might be. And I didn't see that come forward, so if we
I want to do that. I want to do a nomination. Do you
Okay.
think, Melissa, would you mind sending me the form? Thank you. You can do email. Thank you. So that works.
And then maybe next month, if we have those ready, because we have, I think, Chairman, we're allowed 3?
Up to 3
Up
per
to
year.
3 a year. So I think we have 2 others, and you have 1 that you wanted to add, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, good.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Anything else? Okay, do any of the commissioners here have any comments or announcements at this time?
I guess I would just offer one comment. Just my compliments to the firms and staff who have been involved in the presentations to date with regard to our Atlas project. I think it's really helped get the juices flowing, if you will, as far as people's imaginations, and I think it shows really what the potential can be out there for what might be yet to come. And so it makes it a pretty exciting process, and I think it's credit to the work well done. So thank you.
Chairman, I have a point of order. I was looking and talking with Mr. Boyd a little bit, and we have public comments number 7. I'd like to have the presentation of the waterfront presentation first to allow the public to have an opportunity to see the presentation so they can speak to it authoritatively.
Yeah, I was going to mention that Phil and Dell in their presentation have a specific slot in their agenda for the Atlas Mill property for public comment specific to Atlas Mill. So what I would offer right now, is there anybody else in the audience who would like to address the commission that isn't specific to the Atlas Mill agenda item tonight? Yes. Come on, you can come on up to the podium, and if you would give your name and address for the record.
My name is Dwight McCain, 5537 Nina Court, Coeur Lane.
Okay.
Okay, I'm a kayaker. In fact, I'm currently president of the Coeur Lane Canoe and Kayak Club. And I'm sorry I missed the meeting Friday, but I'd be more informed. But the paper said that they couldn't put a kayak launch in without additional funding. And I was just going to let you know that the kayakers don't need a dock. They don't need any facility to launch from. All they need is a parking lot close so they can get their kayaks to the water, and a smooth beach going into the water, and that's sufficient for all the kayakers I know. If you're talking about an ADA compliant kayak launch and stuff like that, that's beyond, I think, what you would need for that facility. You talked about that during on the East Park, and that was kind of nixed by the residents. But I don't know, it could be put on Independence Point if that's what you're trying to do, you know, at Independence Beach, because you've got a ramp going down and that could be facilitated there. But as far as the standard kayakers, all we do is get our boat to the water and not have to deal with, like they have around NSA Beach now, you've got a rock berm, so we're restricted going down the steps, or on the trails going down from the dike road down to the beach, you've got switchbacks in all but the last two and the first one, all those. So if you're going to two-man a kayak, you can't really do it through a switchback, especially when you put a big rock in the center. So as far as Atlas Beach, straight access to the water, so we can carry our kayaks down tandem, and a smooth beach. There's no additional expense required.
I might mention, if you stay for the Atlas waterfront presentation, you'll have an opportunity to see the presentation that was given on Friday at the workshop. So there might be more opportunity during that, after that presentation, for you to
I'll
comment
attend that,
further.
but I missed the one last Friday.
Yep.
So I just want to make sure that you didn't require, there's no additional expense for a kayak launch.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner?
Any questions?
So, sir, you're going to get what you're asking for in this design. You'll see that coming forward. So it is there. We understand all you need is just a good, slight beach.
Baker said that maybe we require additional funds from the inside.
Well, you'll see where that if you can stick around, you'll see, as Scott said, the chairman said, that it's part of the opportunity we have before us today. Okay, great.
Mr. Chair,
Yep. Bridget?
I was hoping we would bring that back up for further discussion, as well as the stand-up paddleboard, but I also had questions because Blackwell Island was also discussed briefly as an option, and I'm hoping we'll talk a little bit about that tonight.
Okay, very good. Any other people wish to speak? Come on up.
For the record, I'm John Partridge. I live at 7765 North Gila Court in Coeur d'Alene.
Okay, John?
Thank you for your service. I don't know if I address you as board members or commissioners. I haven't been to one of these meetings before, but I do appreciate what you do, and I do appreciate so much of the Parks and Rec services and facilities that we enjoy throughout the year, so thank you again. Two questions or two issues I have, and I don't even know if this is the proper venue or controlling authority body to bring this up to. I'm curious, and I know there's been a lot of enthusiasm and energy directed toward the Atlas Mill project. What I'm wondering about, and so much wonderfulness is behind me in McEwen Park, save the docks. I know that when you go down to 3rd Street and you utilize those docks, which I do every year, they seem to be in disrepair, and I don't know how I can facilitate or address that. Is there a better time to do that? Or are you guys the ones that handle that? Or is it another?
Well, we're kind of a group as kind of help set policy.
Okay.
Policymakers. Things specific to repairs or things that you see there, I would suggest you direct it directly to Bill Greenwood, who is the Parks and Recreation Director.
All right.
What are some of the things specifically are you seeing in the docks?
Splintering wood, it's a wood dock primarily. I know that there was some slipping. People were slipping as they went down that ramp that leads to the docks. Last summer, a lot of those bumpers that are supposed to be strapped to the corners were slipping off, protruding nails. It just seemed like somewhat of a hazard as we utilize those. And they're a great feature. I mean, it's great for the public to just use those for a day or two or for a few hours. And my wife and I do enjoy that. So I didn't know who else to address, but to come before this body and make a note of it. The other thing I was wondering about, this is a separate issue, is the beach along the college campus. Is that controlled by Parks and Rec? No. Is that BLM?
Do you want to address that, Christie?
Sure. I'm Christy Wood. I'm board chair at
Christy.
North Idaho College.
you.
And yeah, the college does the maintenance on the beach. That is
Oh.
the college beach.
All right.
Yeah.
Right.
Are there
What-
issues that you have found?
It's a very enjoyable facility. We go down there, recreate, my family and I. I'm curious about what I would call, for lack of a better term, the waterfowl feeding area. Now, my limited knowledge of waterfowl, wild birds, and their migration, I had always understood that it would be a negative to domestically feed wild birds and prohibit their natural course of feeding themselves and being able to migrate back where they came from. Is that accurate at all? Have you heard
Well,
this addressed before?
I would love to tell you that I know everything about wild birds, but I don't. But they have been allowing for the public to feed the birds there for a few years now. And the birds must be telling everybody they know, because there are lots of them. If you have some concerns, or if you want to speak to the board about that, you're more than welcome to come to the NIC board meetings. And the next one is Wednesday, I think it's the 27th of March is a Wednesday.
Is there an online calendar for that I
There
can
is,
look up?
there
Okay.
is. And we would be glad to hear your comments. And we would have staff there that could answer to the specifics of how long we've been doing it and what are we observing and is it something we should continue. We do get other comments about, and it's fun. It's fun for the kids to go down and feed them, but yeah, we have a lot of birds, so.
It's very fun to see the deer in your backyard at Dalton, but I don't think it's
Right.
good for the deer.
Right, right. So we're happy to hear from you at the college meeting.
That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Bill, did you have any comment or suggestions for
Well, in the
John
future,
in
yeah, no,
contacting?
if there's something that's going on that we haven't caught, last year, I do recall us replacing the abrasive material on that dock, so it got icy and some folks slipped, so we tore off the old stuff, put new on. Those docks get used a lot. Bull rails bust almost weekly. People hit them too hard, or they forget to untie when they back out from their moorage, and so we're constantly repairing those as quickly as we find them. But anybody who sees something can certainly contact our office. That we're always grateful for helpful eyes to let us know. So, yeah.
Okay.
And then they got tore up real quickly, you know, in the windstorm of November 2015. They got just beat up terribly, and we spent about $40,000 on getting those back to shape, because if you remember, that was those pushing 70-mile-an-hour winds. But so we do our best to keep them up. They are wood, they do splinter, and when we get around to ever replacing those, my hope is that we can afford to do the composite decking like we have along the seawall dock, because those have just really maintained like they're almost brand new. The wooden docks, not so much.
Okay. Any other people wish to comment? Okay, Bill, with that then, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our presentation tonight.
Thank you. Phil Boyd, Welshcombers here, along with Dale Hatch with Bardano Wills, to give an updated presentation from what we saw in the workshop on Friday. We're grateful to them, like was being said earlier by Mike. This is an opportunity to be seen on the air again, where our workshop was not televised, and so it's really critical that we're doing this again. This is our third time to you, I think. And so with that, I will just give it to Phil and Dell.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman Cranston and commission members. I apologize that you're going to have to listen and sit through this again, but maybe you'll see something different this time than what you saw the first time. So background, and again, I'm repeating this for the purposes of the television and for the folks that are here this evening that may not have been here last Friday. Ignite had asked the city to give them some input on potential projects in the Lake District that were beyond what we originally created in the concept that I'll show you in a little bit. Mayor Widmeyer convened the workshop on Friday to allow the Parks and Rec Commission to have a dialogue with the City Council, so you guys could provide your observations from a Park and Rec standpoint, and the council could ask you questions and see how you felt about things. I thought that was a very good meeting. And then at the conclusion of that meeting, Mayor Widmeyer asked Chairman Cranston to have the commission tonight give a prioritization, so then the City Council could take that forward to the meeting on March 28th with Ignite. So that's the background why the meeting we had on the 15th, and tonight's objective is to review the Atlas and the BLM corridor projects, because that's in the Lake District. And then, as Chairman Cranston said, we'll stop, I will stop, Dell will stop, and there'll be opportunity to receive public input. And then once you all have had the opportunity to hear that, or if there's questions we can answer, we would do that. And then you could prioritize the projects and we'll move that forward. So that's our objective for tonight. Community engagement, we continue to build to this slide. You'll see number 15 was our meeting that we had last Friday. Mayor Woodmeyer had put community input on that agenda, did a little bit of community input. That was good. This is the rendering of what we're moving currently forward with. And you'll see that we've got what we call the clean and green version here. I'd like to point out that the way that the road has changed from earlier versions, and I'll show some slides of the earlier versions, but the current concept, you come off of Atlas, the waterfront drive, moves along the waterfront, comes through here, goes along the major park area, continues on down to this parking lot, and then it terminates. I have had a few questions of why is this parking lot in this position? It used to be up here. Shouldn't we leave the parking up here? That we could leave the parking up here, but as we worked through some of the access, particularly the making an accessible kayak launch, which I'll get to that in a minute, and an accessible swimming area, it really lent itself to bring the parking area down to here, because we had a parking area there anyway. So we just focused the parking area down into here, and you'll see we left an opportunity for parking up in that area. So this is our current version, the version that we're moving forward with that's received pretty favorable response. Suzanne comes in this direction. The road comes off of Celtice Way through here, and then there's the internal street network that you see. Primarily alley-loaded homes. That way there's no driveways to disrupt the frontage here. This is a previous version, one of the very first versions, and you can see that there's a water feature here, there's an amphitheater, quite an extensive parking area. The road comes through here, continues along the waterfront, and continued all the way through Beebe Boulevard, on Tilford Lane down to Beebe Boulevard. You can see some additional parking in this area. This didn't receive a favorable response for the community, so we started looking at other options that moved the road closer to the water. So this is the Riverstone parking area here. This is the Riverstone restrooms to get your bearings. We looked at this scenario with moving the road down along the waterfront here. That also didn't receive a lot of favorable response. So we moved on to another option. You can tell we like options, but that's part of the process, is to roll these things out and see how they're received by the public and continue to refine it and get direction from the commission and Bill. This option brought the road down, had parking in here so you could easily access the beach, continued and loop back up in this direction. And again, that was an option that didn't receive a lot of favorable response from the public, which brought us back to this version, which this is just another more delightful rendering that Del Hatch did that shows the waterfront. You can see the black line up here is the roadway. It continues on through here and terminates in the parking area here, and you'd loop back around. This is the funded project. And so when we talk about what's funded, if there's no additional work or no additional projects that are funded by Ignite or the city, what will we get? And this is the clean and green version. The majority of the work consists of moving dirt around, building an irrigation system, stabilizing the shoreline, putting in a paved wheel path that would come off of the Centennial Trail at this location. I'll show you this little section right here. You can notice that there's a blue line that comes like this, and there's this orange line that comes down here. These are separated. One's a wheeled trail that comes through here, the orange line, continues on along the waterfront, and you can see that there's another one that comes through the trees here to catch folks that might be headed southbound. This was a comment that we received out of the Centennial Trail Commission, that they liked the idea of having a southbound route that you could just drop right into here without having to continue this way and switch back. This is a little bit of a challenging route. I know Commissioner Wood spends a lot of time down here. That's a heavily treed area. It's fairly steep. It'll be a little bit of a challenge, but a neat park experience to ride your bike through. Separate pedestrian drop-in here, and you'll see there's a switch back here, and that's to create an accessible route, so folks that might need a little bit of a gentler grade to navigate that can accommodate that route. This area here is a little bit of a overlook. Also had some questions about that. Why is there an overlook there? And if you just think about the use of that trail, there's lots of activity on it, and we all have been on that trail before where people stop and try to decide which way we're going to go, kids. And you're trying to navigate that area, and there's nowhere for them to move. And that really presents a refuge for them to move out of the way, and they'll kind of naturally get out of the thread of the trail and make their decisions. You get to here, and you can actually look down that direction and make some decisions. The pedestrian route, this would obviously be paved. When you get down into here, it turns into a gravel route, and it's gravelled along the majority of the trail. There will be some areas where there's lots of traffic, lots of cross traffic, that we would make a hard surface so you're not destroying the gravel section. A picnic shelter and a restroom right here, a little bit of turf in here, lots of natural landscaping in the linkages, these long areas here. So rather than a bunch of turf for Bill to have to mow and maintain, mostly a natural area, and then one water access, probably be down in this area.
Okay, that was what my question was.
So the projects that we saw as potential additional projects, the big one we had heard about was the Water Dog Park, which is shown here. A beach area with an accessible beach, and that's in this area. And again, I'll address the why are the dogs upstream of the people. There's also a wastewater treatment plant discharge upstream of the people that's a little further upstream, but they do produce lovely wastewater from the system. It's very clean. But wherever we put the dog park, if we put it here, there's still swimming downstream of it. So wherever the dog park goes, there will be some people downstream of it. This is a really convenient location for the dog park to be, and it worked out well. Obviously, it's still subject to the commission's direction, but from our perspective, it was just a good place for it to be. The accessible kayak launch. Yes,
Excuse
sir.
me, so could you speak to some of the research you've done about how you're going to, the rock and up at the front, at the edge of the shoreline?
Yeah, that's a good point. And all, Councilmember Miller, who commented at our workshop about the work she had done at the Blackwell Island property that the city owns there about putting a dog park there, she did a lot of research about dog behavior. And what encourages them not to go potty right at the water line is when they come out, you put large boulders in there, and for whatever reason, they pass on through that and move upland, and then they'll do their business once they're away from the water line, gives the dog owner opportunity to clean up the mess. And I think as Commissioner Wood said at the workshop, for the most part, dog owners are pretty careful about cleaning up.
They are, Phil, but how do we keep our kids from going in the water? What are we going to do about that?
That's beyond my expertise. My kids are grown.
Beyond his pay grade.
The other item that was we talked about was the accessible kayak. And the gentleman that spoke earlier, we have heard that a number of times. All we need is a route to the beach. And we agree, most kayak users do that. And you can see that route if you were to park right here, and we made these pull-in spaces, so you can pull in if you happen to be trailering yours, which a lot of kayakers don't. They put it on their roof. But folks that might be in a wheelchair will tow their kayak, and they could pull into this space. Anybody could pull into this space here, get your kayak, walk right here, and you walk right down to the beach. And it's an uninterrupted, kind of a straight shot. And the comments we heard tonight are several that we've heard from kayak users, and it's the type of thing that we're looking for, and we encourage all those little tiny details that are helpful in the design process. For folks that need a hard surface to negotiate their kayak down, that would be this route, that you would come down this way and head over here to an accessible launch. And that is primarily what it's for, is folks that might be in a wheelchair, now they have a place to go and launch their kayak. Could be that a large majority of folks go here, but folks that might need to use that launch can go over here. Natural style playground, that's up in this area here. And again, we had heard comments earlier that early on in the process from the master planning that folks didn't want to see what we have here at McEwen, the colorful one. They wanted to see something that was more consistent with the natural style mill theme of the park area. Landscape water feature, I think this one is probably off the prioritization list. We do think it's a nice amenity for the park, but what we heard from the council and the commissioners on Friday was it's probably low on the list. Additional pedestrian accesses to the Spokane River, and you can see that's a big number, $1.3 million as the estimate. And I will pause here for a second and say that these are kind of 30,000-foot level estimates. We're using big round numbers at this point because we don't even know if we're moving forward with them. If the commission says, or the Ignite says, gosh, we don't have the money, we're not moving forward with it, well, there's no point in investing a bunch of city time and money and Ignite time and money in digging into the details and getting really refined estimates. So these are early estimates, and we are generally pretty conservative with them, meaning we're high.
Phil, which specific areas on the map are you referring to when you talk about the additional pedestrian accesses to the river?
So here's the one that is either, this is the kayak launch here.
Okay.
We have the opportunity to put the one that's in the base project, the Clean and Green project. It could go here, or it
Okay.
could go here. And the reason it's kind of tied to those two locations is it's the most cost-effective locations to put it. And if you kind of remember where we're at in that, the ground is really close to the water there. So there's not a lot of money associated with building that. When I roll the slide, or the mouse forward here, you'll see the 4 red circles come on.
Okay,
And those are the additional ones.
okay.
And what they consist of, and I have detailed slides of these if the commission would like me to hit those, or if one of the publics has a comment about them, we can look at those slides in detail. There's an opportunity here. These are kind of steps that move into the water at this location. This is a much larger gathering area. It's right on a street alignment. And so it creates a really neat observation when you're driving down there and you see people, hey, what's that? Let's stop, let's get out, let's enjoy it. And similar to this one here. So those are the ones that we would be the additionals. The Prairie Trail Underpass is up here, and that's another concept we had looked at about separating the trail from the vehicle traffic. And again, I think that's one of them that probably is off the list, or certainly further down the list based on what I heard on Friday.
Phil, those extra pedestrian accesses to the river,
Yes.
the 1.3 million, is that if all 3 or 4 of them are done? Can they be separated out?
They can be separated out, and I'm just going to, if you guys bear with me, I'll scoot forward and I'll show you what these look like. This is one that is the one near the what we call the vendor day use stocks. And you can see that this commercial lot that's in the background here, this is an idea on how you might have an access down to the water. And you can see there's steps that come down here. This is in a dock that there might be food, waterfront seating there that's tied to the commercial lot. And that's the type of relationship that Ignite and the city are trying to create here is this commercial lot needs to have some waterfront access because that lends to the value and the vibrancy of that commercial lot. There's an area over here that might be just for folks to go down and dip their feet in the water. And you can see here it's a different idea where we have a gangway down to the dock. And then here, this is just an overlook. So there's a couple of different scenarios in this area, but it might be one that, gee, we like it, but we don't want to fund it. And let's wait to see when whoever buys this lot to see if there's a partnership that they might say, gosh, we think we want something a little different here. So if there's comments that the commission says, we think this should be a lower priority one, as opposed to ones like this, and these are areas where folks have made the trail. This is at low water, and so the pool is down. This is ordinary high water right in here, and you see folks scramble down this. And so we need to restore that in some way. If we don't get additional funding, it'll be restored with vegetation. There'll be a temporary fence put up here to allow the vegetation to establish. But you can imagine the the more industrious folks might still recreate that erosion in here. And this is a little idea where we just put steps in there. Now you can take a path down there and dip your feet in the water. And there's several locations from this road alignment to this road alignment that provide opportunities for that. There's about 3 or 4 in there. Our budget has for 3 steps like this.
You mentioned, and maybe I've just missed this detail, the commercial lot, it might be for sale?
Yes, so and maybe I haven't done a good job explaining that. This red area right here is a commercial parcel that's adjacent to the park. It's one of 2 commercial waterfront or near waterfront parcels. It's all public property in front of it. It's public property along it. When we did the original financial feasibility report for Ignite, determining how much property do we need to sell in order to be able to reimburse the city for what they paid for the property and fund all these improvements that we're looking at, while also taking the most valuable piece of property out of private hands, it's now putting it in the public, all 4,000 feet of the waterfront. That was a piece that we had to add in to drive the revenue stream up. It's also a neat component to add vibrancy to the parks, because if you think about just having parks, there's a limitation of how many people that will draw. Well, when you put some fun commercial feature that's adjacent to the park, that's going to add vibrancy. And if you think of some of the great places you've been, this is actually an example here. You think about Bakery by the Lake, how great that is. Sweet Lou's, you go there, look out over the park. Similar type of thought here. Moving on to the next one. This is one of the most expensive ones. And you can see this dip in the shoreline here. This actually historically was where the log chain pulled the logs out of the water up to the mill. So a bale of logs was pulled in here, and they would pull them into the log chain. And this is a long, long time ago, but that's what created that. We would like to take advantage of that and stabilize the shoreline here and stabilize the shoreline here. You see there's a tremendous amount of erosion here and here. We need to do something there. And this is GGLO, one of our team members from Seattle. This is a project up in Canada that they devised this idea, and it's really inspiring. And so we're thinking that something like this would be appropriate there. Stabilize the shoreline, provide opportunity for folks to go down and dip their feet in the water. That's a zoom in on it so you can see a little more detail on it. You can see how the street comes down here, terminates into a plaza. The pedestrian trail goes up and around, and then the paved bike trail is back here. So it's a very close proximity of the road to the water, because that's the objective that we're trying to create. This is the last one, and this is also a natural existing depression. I was out there one day and I noticed this, and I thought, wait a second, we got to take advantage of this, because folks have created this route. And if you were to walk out there now, you walk along, it dips down right here, and there's trails that run down to the water. And so, again, rather than planting it or trying to fill it in, we took advantage of it and created this off-ramp, if you will, that comes out, a set of steps that moves down into the water here. We've stabilized the shoreline and provided opportunity for water access. One of the big ones I didn't mention or didn't spend enough time on was the beach, and I'll just talk about that. This is what the beach looks, the east end of the project. So the dog park is right here. Riverstone is over in this area, and you can see from here to the parking lot. This area, that's what it currently looks like. If you were to draw a cross-section through the earth, you can see that you come out of the water, there's a big hump of dirt, there's a big hole, and then it comes back up. And so just kind of intuitively, you look at that and say, I wonder if this came from here. Which, based on our soils test, it did. And at some point in the past, they created a mill pond there, and that is the leftovers. And trees have volunteered themselves on there and grown up. Bill doesn't like those trees, so they need to come out anyway. So our idea is to take and restore the beach, and we've done several soils tests along this area that indicate we can go in and restore that, and it will look much like NIC's beach. And we'll pull this material out. A lot of it will probably go off-site because it's got organics in it now, and we may import material that looks like this and restore the beach line along there. Part of the other key feature of this area, and this is a feature that I know Bill has been trying to put into the park system, is an accessible swim area. So again, for folks that might be in a wheelchair, is giving them an opportunity to get into the water and navigate once they're in the water. I've got two different images here. One shows once you get into the water, and this is kind of a route into the water. A lot of the imagery that we see and the designs that we see are kind of, they're a route. They're a 4-foot wide path that gets you to the water. Bill and I have talked a lot about this, and our design objective, and the budget shows this, is we're trying to create actual place where you can get into, and there's more hard surface on the edge of the beach, and there's more hard surface below the water. The bathymetry, the lake bed, the riverbed in this particular area really lends itself to it. It's flat there, it's relatively shallow, and we can go in and create an area that's navigable by folks in a wheelchair. And again, if it gets funded, we'll go spend time with folks and talk to them. What do you envision needing here? What would work for you? But making it where a family can go and enjoy it, and you're not just limited to a single area. You actually have place to move around and along the beach. So something larger than what you see here is what we've budgeted for. Commissioner Hill, that might have been more than you wanted,
No, that was good.
but I took the opportunity to jump into it there.
I do have another question for some clarity, and I can't tell from the drawing that if you go, I think, all the way to the east, there's a little blue line coming down to the view dock, I guess. Right, what is that blue?
This right here?
No, the blue line that actually looks like an artery.
Oh, this right here?
Yeah,
Oh, excellent. The anatomical reference helped me. That is actually the existing Riverstone sidewalk.
okay,
So if the restroom would be about in this area, the Centennial Trail is moving along this way, or
Yes.
the Prairie Trail, and this is where the route comes out of Riverstone.
okay. I see, all right.
The objective here, the design objective, again, was to create an intersection. We had quite a bit of discussion with the Bike Ped Committee about this. Originally, when Del Hatch and I designed this, we had a single intersection here where both the bike trail actually came up here and tied into this. It creates a congestion intersection on purpose. So people slow down and say, something's going on here. I slow down, I pay attention, and then once I get back on it, I take off again. The Bike Ped Committee had thought, well, maybe we better actually have two separate intersections, one just for pedestrians and one just for bicyclists. And that's why we separated the intersections here. Again, it's not set in stone, so as we receive input and direction from folks, we can design accordingly. And you can kind of see it here in this rendering, one of Dell's nice renderings. The pedestrian route comes down here, transitions at this point, once you get to the dog park to gravel, and the bike route drops off right there.
Bill, I think that's important to have that separation. A lot of us are on the trails every day, and there are a lot of bikes on the trails too. And they're on a mission. They have places to go. And so they really don't like it when I'm kind of moseying along with my dog. In fact, this one guy called me these really amazing names with his English accent. It was really something. But I think, for their sake too, they don't want to get hurt. They don't want to hit a lady and her dog. And so this makes sense that we separate that so that they can have a clear path.
That's good. That's good input. That's the type of information we're looking for. Okay, I will go back. Sorry for flipping through the screens here so quickly.
There we go. Let's spend a little time here.
So, let's see. So now on to our other items that we had in here, the potential park support revenue projects. And you can see I separated these out. I have additional improvements up here, and these are really ones, all of them need public input, but these up here, you put them in, they're great, the Parks Department maintains them, and people enjoy them. There's another set, and these grew out of our discussions with our steering committee. Is there opportunity to put in park features that can generate revenue, but also create a positive benefit for the public. And that's why we've separated these out here. The first one is a food truck vendor area, which is right over here. And Bill receives quite a bit of demand for that. Over on the Memorial Park site, we actually put in 2 truck vendor areas there, food truck vendor areas. And if you go over there, it might be a little bit of a challenge to actually figure out where they were, because we worked pretty hard to kind of tuck them in there and hide them. But if you look, there's a couple of power pedestals there, and you can pull those trucks in there and have vendors in that area. There's space for about 4 here, would be where you could pull off and pull them in there. Maybe there's a gate on each side so cars don't mistakenly pull into it. That would generate a little bit of revenue. Another area is the vendor/police building. We had originally envisioned putting a vendor building in here that maybe the kayaks or the paddle boards are leased out of, rented out of. It's an area that they can store them so they're not hauling them in and out. And you heard Bill talk about that with the powerboat launches at 3rd Street. Well, there's also the folks that are dragging their trailer full of kayaks and paddle boards down every day. If there were a small building here, they could store them overnight, and they would lease that through your bid process. When we mentioned that to the steering committee, Commissioner Wood said, well, gosh, is there an opportunity to put a police area in there? And so a little room they could go in and do their reports and kind of have a presence down there. That seems like a pretty logical place. They could have a reserved car parking spot in this location. Park maintenance building, rather than, again, Bill hauling stuff down, each time we've tucked one in the corner right there. It's out of the way, not a prominent location, would have a screened-in back area where he could store soils, grass clippings and whatnot, and then have his building he can park his equipment in. The vendor day use docks, these moved further down the priority list. Those are in this location, and you can see they're quite expensive to build. The annual lease docks are in this location here, and the idea there is the Parks Department or the city could lease them on an annual basis. If you're in the neighborhood up here, you wouldn't have a parking space down here. You'd simply have to walk down, get in your boat, and off you go. And then this little wing would be the west day use docks, and again, those are intended to support this commercial space. So we've purposely put them on there as an appendage that maybe they're put in with some partnership funding from the folks up here. And the same thing could go for the piece down here.
Phil, before you move on, maybe this might be a good place to have a short discussion as we try to formulate our priorities. It seems to me on the list of additional improvements and those potential park elements that could be revenue producing, there are 2 different types of projects. So take an example, your water access elements. That's kind of integral with the park construction. And so if you're talking about some type of prioritizing things that might be a lower level of priority, but would be tougher to phase in construction at a later date, either due to funding or just kind of the dynamics of how it's constructed. It would seem to me that the water access elements would be a lot harder to accommodate later if they weren't in the initial phase of construction versus some of these other elements that are buildings. If utilities were in place, might be a little easier to accommodate with a later phase. Do you have any comment or?
Yes, and I think that those were some of the good feedback we received, and you could kind of get the commission's thinking and the city council's thinking from Friday. The first example is down here in this particular location where the vendor police building might go. We can certainly stub in power. We're going to be dragging power through there anyway. We can stub in wastewater and water, drop it off here, and maybe it's grass initially, and then later on, once the city has generated enough funds, we can go in there and put a building in there, but it would be prepped for it. We may even figure out the footprint, so we've got it dialed in pretty tightly. Same thing for the docks down in this area. Just you think about the way that the gangway comes off of, typically you'd have a bulkhead, a concrete bulkhead, and then the gangway goes off of that. Well, we might build the concrete bulkhead while we're disturbing dirt and simply put a rail in front of it, and now it's an overlook. But when the docks actually get moved in, you pull the rail out, and now it becomes a gangway location. So I think, Chairman Cranston, those are the types of thinking you're looking for, and we like hearing that, and we can certainly design it into this location, the vendor building here, this location for the gangway as well. So there's several opportunities for that. I'm not sure that Bill would like it if we phase in the park maintenance building. That's probably pretty high on his priority list.
Yeah, once we build it, it might be good to keep it in good condition, you think?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman? You know, from my point of view, after our workshop with council, it would seem to me that we want to look toward maybe establishing some top priority items, a number one priority, if you will. And then maybe some secondary priorities like the other buildings that could be added in at a later date. And then a tertiary priority for things like the docks that require some further analysis before they can be incorporated in, and maybe a decision later on would be appropriate for those. What does the commission think as far as that approach?
Yeah, and our chairman had a great priority list on Friday. I think all of us agreed with that. You might want to restate it, Scott, but that was a great stepping off point, just that priority list.
Well, I think we're probably going to get into the list of priorities here probably after we've heard public comment.
Right.
I think that was
Get into the
the,
detail, and if you want, Christie, I can certainly kind of repeat my thoughts on
Yeah, and
what
then if
those
we hear
initial steps
something-
were, but
Yeah, if we hear something different, we can go back and rethink it, but maybe you would put out what we discussed on Friday.
and that, Chairman Cranston, if I might, that is what I hope we've captured here, and I think what Commissioner McDowell just summarized, we tried to capture that from what we heard on Friday in this list here. I don't want to, I'm trying not to skip ahead and be presumptuous with the idea to allow the public to weigh in, because these may move around once we see them. But I did take advantage of the wisdom that you provided on Friday to produce this list. So it's in the presentation tonight.
Can I just ask, since money started to come up, kind of, you talked about the kayak access, and I think it had a $250,000 ticket,
Yes, ma'am.
but the description that you gave sounded like, oh, you just walked from the parking lot to the beach. So I'm curious what $250,000 gets you.
It's, that's an excellent question, and I think I'll show it with a picture.
I was hoping we'd save some money with that one.
And there may be, so to get your bearings, I'll do a couple of things here. I'll start in this image first, and so here's the parking lot. And currently, what's funded is you come off the parking lot, there's probably a little bit of a paved route, and it stops right here. And then off you go on the paved trail here, or off you go on the graveled trail here. There is no hard surface to get down to the kayak launch here. So then if you move over to this image and you look at what it would take, now we're going to take and put hardscape concrete down towards the kayak launch. We're going to build a landing area here. This little piece right here is actually that existing concrete launch that's in the water. So again, not that folks will necessarily launch themselves from there. Maybe if you're on a paddleboard, you might want to walk in on that launch and jump on your paddleboard on this concrete ramp here. But it exists there now, and there's no point in ripping it out of there. It's actually in good condition. So we would take advantage of it and simply put concrete on this upland area. There's quite a number of trees to deal with in here. There's some earthwork. There's some retaining walls. And again, as I mentioned earlier, Commissioner Hill, we're budgeting pretty conservatively because we're so early in this process. There's lots of details in here. The launch facility and the launch docks themselves are not $250,000. So it's the entire, we'll call it an assemblage, to move from the parking lot to get down to here and all the parts and pieces associated with that. So that's why that seems like such a high number.
So I also have a question on that, too. That's such a beautiful beach area, and Dwight mentioned that he just needs a beach. So does the whole thing have to be paved over? I mean,
In this particular area, we, as the gentleman earlier mentioned, I would not anticipate that folks that are just, double carrying their kayak down here might not use this area. Where they might actually go would be right here. So the accessible swim area is right here, the area where folks in a wheelchair might get in. They're very close. They kind of have priority position to the parking lot. You're super close. The folks that are just going to go launch from the beach, they're going to come out of the parking lot, walk right down this ramp, put their kayak on the beach, and off they go. So they're kind of in a second priority. The reason we chose this location, this location for the accessible launch was it got closer to the water. In here where we could put a hard surface kind of gently sloping, because remember, we're trying to meet ADA grades the entire route all the way to the edge of the water. We could do that at the beach location, but we'd just be running it much further.
Okay, so we have maybe two issues now that I'm finally getting. We have that broad area that's already concreted is for accessible access with kayaks, and then there's another beach area that's accessible as well for swimming.
Correct.
Okay, and then if, otherwise there may be just head straight to the beach. You've got your kayak cart that maybe you pull, but maybe don't need the full accessibility.
Right.
Okay.
Phil, how big is that area of the swim beach where people could just, like you or I, could just carry our kayak in and launch? How long is that whole distance? It looks like the NIC beach.
This area, if I'm remembering right, I want to say it's something like 600 feet. It's quite long, and that's part of our perspective that gets a little bit challenging here. One of the things, this is a little bit off topic, but it goes to the perspective point. When we look at images here, and we look at aerial photographs, it doesn't really do it justice. When you get out there and you actually look at how big the space is, it's much bigger than you think. One of the things we're going to do is actually add waypoints out there. Well, there'll be a little monument in the ground. You can take the next iteration of this, kind of the next refinement, go out there with a little 8.5 by 11 and stand on position 6 and go, oh, this is where the kayak launch is. So now folks can actually go out there once the snow is gone, orient themselves and say, okay, I get it. I understand why they decided to put the launch here. I don't necessarily agree with it, so I'm going to jump online really quick and send an email to CDA or parks@cdaid.org. So I think that's the next iteration, and I think what I might be hearing out of Commissioner Hill, if I can interpret correctly, is there some wisdom in consolidating the beach launching and the kayak launching all in this one area, because the beach does exist there now, as Commissioner Wood pointed out. So we could consolidate all the kayak launching in this location. I'm not sure if you were getting at that, Commissioner Hill, but
I was just, it just dawned on me that we're talking about two different
Yep,
needs,
locations,
possibly.
yeah.
And I'm pretty confident that a lot of kayakers with that amount of distance will be using kayak carts. Two people may carry it, but I'm still not sure of the distance, but.
And that's one of the reasons we did put, if you pull in here, it's a pretty short distance to carry your kayak down to the beach right here.
Okay,
Going to the west is further.
yes.
And the topography is higher until you get further west, then it drops off. Here, we can get to we've purposely brought the parking lot very low to create the accessible route for folks to the swim area here that might be in a wheelchair. And again, these are early concepts, and they'll continue to get refined.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. This was an image, just a summary on the docs, and the commissioners have seen this about the estimated revenue that might be generated for purposes of park maintenance, and I put that up for folks that are here, maybe watching on TV. This was an idea that was generated out of the steering committee. Again, how do you pay to maintain all this parks that we're adding? Of course, tax revenue is one of them. Fees, lease fees is another, lease revenue, and you can see the estimated revenue that might come out of the annual lease docks and then the day use vendor docks. So another part of our discussion is the BLM corridor, because it's part of the Lake District, and that was the mayor's charge to the Parks and Rec Commission, in addition to the Atlas, was give us your opinion on where you think we might want to tell Ignite, if we have the opportunity to secure additional funding, where might it go? The BLM corridor, as you all know, there's been wonderful advancement of the Four Corners BLM improvements over here. Memorial Field, the grandstands are going to get redecorated this year. The skate park is in place. This summer, the area between River and Hubbard, which is currently kind of a no man's land, the blue building has been torn down, but it's the trail is not clear, is going to get finished this summer. NIC funded that project. So pretty much from Four Corners to Hubbard will be finished. There's also been improvements that Bill's crew has put together and volunteers for the pump track, the cyclocross track. There's a skills course in here. Many of the things that were envisioned as part of the master plan have been developed in here. And so when Bill and I started thinking about, primarily Bill, what does he want to see done in here? And he looked back on the improvements in this area. The conclusion was, well, we've got Atlas now to do some of these things that we might have envisioned here at this Harbor Center Marina, because we have that opportunity, and there's some other opportunities in Atlas. So let's rethink what we might do in the La Crosse area here. The first one is, of course, this was part of the original master plan. We have to get folks into it. So that first one is a pretty big ticket item. And the reason it's a big ticket item is if we're going to go tear up the intersection, we've got to prepare for a signal to be there at some point in the future, because this road is intended to connect into Riverstone. It would come into here, it wouldn't dead end at this location, but there would be a gate here. So when folks look at this and say it's running into Bella Reed, the intention is that there would be a gate there. Have to have a parking lot in that location. So that's kind of the first backbone project that when Bill and I started looking at this was kind of the number one recommended improvement.
What's the price tag on that, Bill, or Phil?
It's $890,000.
Okay.
It's a big ticket item, but there's quite a bit of work. There's some demolition work that needs to go in there, and there's water and sewer that needs to go in to deal with the restroom that would be in this area in the future.
Bill, is that, for urban renewal, is that the river district there, or the lake?
It's the Lake District.
Lake District.
Yep, all the topics, the additional funding that we're talking about is specific to the Lake District, because it will sunset in 2021.
Thank you.
Obviously, if you have a road going in here and you're going to have park space, let's put a parking lot. And you can see we were only putting in half the parking lot because the micro soccer over here, the pickleball courts are not envisioned as part of this first phase. As the park grows into itself and you start adding these things, you could add parking, but initially trying to put in the enough but not too much is just half the parking lot. Site remediation with dryland native grasses, that consists of essentially removing the gravel that's there now, removing the noxious weeds, spreading topsoil in there, and planting native grasses. No irrigation system. And again, Bill's trying to be judicious about the expenditures and not create a long-term operational cost, because obviously if you have to buy water, now it increases your long-term operational cost. A picnic shelter in this area here with restrooms in it, and that's a very similar cost of what the Memorial Park restrooms were. Potentially a picnic shelter here overlooking the river, and whoops, that would require realignment of a little bit of the Centennial Trail, and then gravel walking paths, which were part of the original Four Corners BLM area, to kind of make it usable. So rather than wandering through native grasses, you've got a little walking trail you can take your dog on. So I think when Bill and I worked through this, the idea was let's create enough there to create a usable park space that's enjoyable, but not so much that we're getting crazy with adding these elements down here like the micro soccer in the parking lot, and pickleball. You can grow into those. So this is getting to the end of it. This was the prioritization that I think I heard on Friday, and I attempted to do, as Commissioner McDowell lined out, the highest priority ones in this first tier. And they started out with pedestrian access, accessible swim areas, the kayak launch, the water access dog park, the playground, the food truck, park maintenance building, vendor building, and then the Suzanne Trail crossing. This is the bare minimum Suzanne Trail crossing, not the underpass. And this priority, I think as the public looks at this and hears what I think I heard on Friday, it might get reorganized. In La Crosse, you can see that the signal, you're kind of forced into that being number one, because you can't really do the rest of them, couldn't get there. The parking lot, site remediation, the restroom, the first restroom, the gravel walking path, and then the Spokane River one might be the last priority there. And then this tertiary group here are the ones that generate revenue and are primarily the docks and the water feature. They are the docks and the water feature. That's what I heard on Friday, and I think Chairman Cranston, with this, unless you want Dell to go through and talk about the restrooms now, this might be the opportunity to talk about, have public input, or however you'd like to move forward at this point.
Well, do you have any key elements left in the presentation?
The restrooms might be worth having Dell talk through.
Why don't we do that, and then
Yeah.
we'll get into some public comment.
Okay, very good. Well, I'll have Dell come up because this is his territory. Thank you.
Good evening. In addition to all of the other interesting things that Phil's been showing you, we've also been working with some concepts on what our architecture might be for the park. This concept that you see here is not as traditional as some of our other park restroom shelters. We're looking at materials that might be metal clad, but still trying to highlight certain areas with some wood accent. This one is basically a large cantilever, essentially one large cantilever truss system. These, I should say, are also about the same square footage of the new one that was just completed in Memorial Field, at Memorial Park. So we have restrooms, access. We also have a chase and mechanical room, and then we would have some sort of a covered area for picnicking, et cetera. So this one being a little bit more on the modern side. The other one that we're exploring and we think is probably been promoted as a more likely candidate would be to pick up on what was more the historical or traditional structure and shape of what the mill buildings would be. So this one also about the same size as the recent one at Memorial Park. Restrooms, access to that chase and mechanical area. On the park side, an open shelter. Again, working with wood trim and some metal clad. So these are the two options that we've sort of landed on at this point. Quite different really in looks. This one I think a little bit more traditional. This one also very interesting, but a little bit more edgy. Any questions on those?
Mr. Chair. So, Dell, we had talked quite a bit about the timber theme to honor the mills that really made this city vibrant and what we are today. Even though they're gone, we wanted to honor with the timber theme. So the first one that you showed, I don't think really, it's just too modern for that. Mm-hmm. The second one is kind of a little bit like a barn. So can you explain that design?
It does have a little bit more volume, vertical volume in it. Just trying to create that look of the height that some of the mill buildings had, a lot of different roof angles and heights to them. This is a fairly simple rendition of that. The space obviously is not usable. It's put there to simply work on the accent of the architecture.
Is there a big cost difference between the two?
No, I don't think so. Both of them are probably costing out about the same. The budget that's been set aside for the shelter restroom is $300,000, which is also roughly, a little bit more, but roughly the cost of our recent one at Memorial Park. It includes, that number would include all of the hardscape associated with it and around it.
And is that the color? Are you looking at a gray theme?
No, not necessarily. What we are looking at is that we thought the metal clad might be appropriate to pick up on what the historical nature of the mill buildings were.
Okay. And I suppose you're looking at old photos from
We are looking at
mills.
some, yes.
Great, thank you.
Commissioners, the restroom at Memorial, it was phased. And so the flat work that went in before, and then we had another contractor actually build the structure. That structure came in at about $260,000. And so Dale's absolutely spot on, because the flat work was laid around it. So around 300 is a fair number, and that's about what we paid for the one at the Memorial Park.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dale.
Okay.
Well, should we open it up for any public comment? Bridget?
Oh, yeah, public comment. The one page that had the list, it'd be great if we had a copy of it. I don't know, is that possible in the next, someone run off and make,
Most of it.
maybe I'm asking too much.
No, I can't see it very well either.
Yeah.
I need my glasses.
It's a good list, and I'd like to, it would be a good little workshop.
Maybe we can we have that
Worksheet.
emailed to us, Melissa? Can we have, thank you.
You mean like right now?
Oh, no.
No, okay. Anyway, it would have been helpful to have had that as a handout. Do you happen to have that? Well, aren't you something?
We'll share it,
Oh,
okay.
we're sharing.
It's
What is
still
that,
really-
is that a font
I can see
too?
that better.
Fine print, yeah. I'm with you
All right.
there.
Okay.
Okay, is there anybody in the audience that would like to have some comment? Why don't we come on up to the microphone? You'll have 3 minutes. Again, if you would just give your name and address for the record,
Dwight McCain,
okay?
5537 Nina Court, Coeur Lane. First, I had a chance to look at this. I see what you've talked about for the kayaks going down to that beach. I think that's very accommodating. Right now, the slope is too great. I mean, you've got a 45-degree angle to get into the water, but I think that's taken out, that'd be fine. My biggest concern looking at this, especially if you have leased boat docks, I don't see parking. The only parking I see is around the park. Those people who come that run their boats are going to come in cars. I observed Silver Beach. Silver Beach has massive parking, and it's full most of the summer. So if you're going to put in boat docks, you need to accommodate that with parking. That's my comment.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes, my name is Lloyd Stewart, 2176 West Alvear Place, Coeur d'Alene. And I have 2 or 3 questions. Bill, could you bring up that one where the Park Road loops down that you referred to as an artery?
Thank you.
Let me go to, I'm sorry, let me move forward to one that. How about that one?
Okay, on the right, you said that it's a hard surface coming down from Riverstone, loops down for wheelchairs, comes down to be the handicap accessible swim area, correct? And then you said gravel walkway beyond that. So that is going to force a person in a wheelchair, if they want to continue on down, they're not going to be able to go over gravel walkways. I think gravel, to begin with, in this day and age, with ADA law passed in 1992, I think that gravel, for any time you want accessible to the general population, which includes people in walkers, strollers with young mothers, and wheelchairs, gravel is not a good surface.
And so that's a good point, and just a little bit of a clarification. The gravel surface there isn't the loose gravel that we kind of have in our mind. The idea is that we're going to use a compacted gravel. It will loosen up over time, and it will require maintenance. The route that is over here, once you get off of the main Centennial Trail, which is a shared use path, as you come down here, this route is also accessible. It's less than 2%. So it's an ADA accessible route, and it is paved 12 feet wide. Your observation is a good one, though. Just as I'm sitting here looking at it, you can see in this location, we bring the hardscape to the dog entry area, and then the trail switches to gravel. Just as you're talking about it, it's one of those details there. It makes sense to run concrete to this location so you could jump right onto the route over here. So this entire route, whether you came down this way, is navigable in a wheeled, whether it's a stroller or a wheelchair or whatever you're in. So that's a good observation, and we can make that change.
The second question I have, I'm with Commissioner Wood. I've been screamed and hollered at because I slowed the bicycle traffic down on the trail. Part of the reason I slow down is because of poor dog control. People that do not leash their dogs, and also right now I can't enjoy the view of the river. If I do, I've got dog piles all over my wheels, all over my gloves, all over my coat. The path right now is covered with dog feces, as well as around the pond at Riverstone. So I would like to know how the dog park is going to be policed so that this doesn't happen. Plus, if you put rocks, every male dog that I've ever seen loves rocks. And so anytime you get a rainstorm, how are you going to control that runoff into the river?
So our park maintenance within the park, dog park itself, our staff goes in there daily, and we really ask for the dog park users to help police themselves. I'm sorry that I experienced the same thing on the trail for dog owners who are not responsible. And we do not go along and pick up all the piles along the trail.
Oh, you can't.
We can't. And so the unfortunate part of it is, as we're coming out of the snow thaw, that kind of stuff is a lot more prevalent because it hasn't had a chance to degrade. It's been kind of frozen and preserved. So we'll get some rain here pretty soon. It'll wash that stuff away. But I'm with you. And I know that we've had this desire to create dog parks for dog parks users and dogs. And we've promoted that. We have now, it'll be 4. But we still have this problem where people aren't being responsible. And I apologize for that.
And the other question I had is the fact that you're creating a problem because the bicycles, it's been referred to constantly as a bicycle trail. It's just only been recently changed to a wheeled trail. It was always, and you're going to have the high-speed bikers that are going to be upset with the wheelchair users. And I can't imagine why the other trail, why can't we be pedestrians? You're relegating us to a bike trail, and we're not, again, it's a discriminatory thing. This has happened all my life, different discriminatory situations where you're closed out because of when you can possibly, I mean, with this scope of a project and the money that's being spent on it, I don't see why that the river trail itself, the pedestrian trail, can't be made for all pedestrians and not just capable people that can walk.
Well, I apologize, hold on a second. So I apologize that the semantics has been wrong, and I understand what you're saying, I truly do. But from our department's position, and I think from Phil's position, is that this has always been a multi-use trail. I know that the bikers are much more advocates for their portion, but we are certainly advocates for folks like yourself and people just walking and running. So we've always seen our trail as not just strictly a bike trail. It's for everybody. And Phil's done something here a little different than we've done before, where he's created a nicer walking path. And that, I grant you won't be able to get on it very easily. But it was her idea, something she saw in Bend, where it allowed you to get closer to the water for walk along that. And it brings just a more natural element in. But we certainly are trying to provide what we can for everybody.
Again, I'm going to have bicyclists.
Yeah, well, you and I talked about this before. I've been yelled at, Christy's been yelled at. I mean, even when we're in there doing maintenance, they start yelling at us.
I can't be a normal pedestrian.
Yeah,
and be
no, I
on
get
the
that.
pedestrian path, and if it was hard surfaced, I could be.
If I could just comment on that, 'cause I think you will be able to. The trail that I saw is in Bend, Oregon. What they've done is very similar to what Coeur d'Alene's trying to do with the Atlas Mill site. They took an old mill site along the water, and they've created these pedestrian trails and parks and pocket areas where the public can get down in the water, and they've done a magnificent job. But the hard surface trail is so compacted that it is accessible. I think you'll find, I'd ask you to take a look at it if you can get online and look at some of the photos. I think you will be able to access it just like you could the hard trail. I agree with Bill that those trails do not belong just to the bikers, and you and I shouldn't be yelled at like we have been. I guess they need to change their behavior. But we don't give up the trail to them. That's not the answer. We all should share the trail. And so my hope is that you and I can be down there and nobody yells at us, and we just keep using it.
Phil, do you have a ballpark number what the difference between a paved surface and this compact gravel surface per foot is?
No, not off the, we actually have it estimated, and I can bring that, I can actually email that to you.
Thank
Or
you.
email it to the commission. Yeah, because we've estimated the value of that. I will reiterate what Commissioner Wood said, is the objective is to create a compacted gravel trail, because it retains more of that natural feel to it, but it still is intended to be accessible. It will have slopes that are ADA slopes. The cross slope will be an ADA slope. The thing that Bill and I have talked about this, it's going to require more maintenance, because it's going to have to be, we'll probably have to add mag chloride to it to recompact the material. He'll have to rent a compactor and compact it.
So, Phil, in the past, I tried working with a polymer over on East Tubbs, and unfortunately there didn't have the sun to cook that. This might be a spot that we could still keep that natural look, and, you know, what it needs is some dry, warm conditions when it's applied, and it sets up, they use this material actually to build temporary runways for the military. It's strong enough that they could land a plane on it. And so that might be something we could do a little research on and see what we can keep that natural feel, but yet make it as hard as the hard surface trail we have.
That is the objective. The other part of it I'll offer up, because the commission has talked about this. At some point, as you move through this, if you determine that, gosh, we tried the gravel trail, we tried the fancy polymers, it's not maintaining its accessibility expectation. You can move in later on, and it will be set up to be paved pretty easily, because the compacted gravel surface will already be there. And I think that's something for the commission to consider.
Well, I think moving forward, the pedestrian portion of the trails, look at how, you know, with a special interest in how that can be maintained as accessible in all areas.
And that has been a design objective throughout this entire park, and it's very challenging when you move into topography like this, but that is our objective, to make the entire park accessible. And I think we've heard that from the commission consistently, and with Bill and Steve Anthony and Doug Eastwood.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Other comments?
Good evening, Chet Gady. I live in Mill River. I'm really concerned about the docks. When we had the first public meetings, the docks were scorned by the public. Went back to the drawing board and came back and said, well, they really aren't a marina. They really are going to be day use for the restaurant in that commercial area. And then they weren't scorned so much, and that was sort of okay. Living down in Mill River, we have some houses in Mill River that have access to the river, and erosion is terrible. The erosion all through this area is terrible. A lot of it's caused by boats. And we say, well, maybe we'll get slower boats, but, you know, it's wakeboarding boats. And so I would like to stress again, where the city is envisioning their commercial marina. The gentleman mentioned parking. That is true. You're going to need a lot of parking there. You're going to need a controlled intersection to go from the parking across the bike trail and across the pedestrian trail to get to the docks. So I think I'm really happy to see it at the bottom of that priority list, and I wish this page was just a little shorter. Get it off. And I know that Bill wants to have some revenue maker, but, and the other thing, Bill, I think you've gone too far with the idea that we're going to be landing airplanes on this thing so that we can gain some revenue.
Well, I want to lease the airplane space.
Yeah, I know. Okay. So anyway, just, I think the docks are almost where they should be. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello. My name is Karen Hansen, and I live at 1200 West La Crosse. And I can't wait to get my bicycle on these trails. I think it's absolutely beautiful. I don't know how hard and fast every implement is. Like where it sits on the drawing is where it has to be. You can't see it, but the playground on the left-hand side of the green, it seems like it would be better placed over by the commercial area and safer to be away from the cars in that area. And people sitting in the restaurant possibly could watch their kids a little bit more if it was placed over on the other side of that greenery. I don't know if that's all set in stone of where it's going to be. But just logically, it just seems like that would be a better place. And I didn't hear any mention of the restrooms or a shelter in that green space. Did I miss something?
That's right there.
Oh, that's a restroom and shelter? Okay. So it looks quite similar to the other one down by La Crosse?
We don't have one across. I mean, it looks similar to the one at Memorial Park. Dell showed those two different renderings, so that would be this area right there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is the playground. One of the things we try and put these in proximity to this restroom facility for the kids. Here at McEwen, it's not that far of a walk. Same thing's true at Memorial Park. It's not that far from the restroom facility. If we placed it way over here to accommodate what might be somebody at this restaurant.
We can't hear you, Bill. Push your button, please.
It is green. God, I'm sorry. So if we
He's
move it
trying to
way over here,
multitask.
it would be too far away. So we try and group these in a way that there's some activity here. One of the things that we can do here is certainly have more of a cushion between this area where there might be traffic. Mm-hmm. We did that again here at McEwen where it butts up to that trail, but we have a bit of a slope before the parking lot. So there's some ways we can do some grading and planting to give some better separation to address your concern.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Okay. And then in the BLM, if you could switch to the BLM one. In the cost summary, I thought there was a restroom and shelter.
Well, there was, that's correct. I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about something that was currently built.
And where is it going to be?
So our thought is it would go right in here somewhere, and we would have this parking lot, have a restroom facility in here somewhere. It maybe makes more sense here and gets this pushed over. We just didn't really change the slide. So in this area is what we're talking about.
Okay. So is that because of the infrastructure coming down La Crosse, that's a better place rather than over by the 95 Bridge area?
Correct. And what happens is, we just wanted to bring in this, because this was part of the plan. We never showed, there's some other things that we looked at in our BLM corridor master plan where this area may get enhanced at a later date, where there's a restroom facility on this end, along with some green space and parking, but that's not part of this. What we're trying to do is get La Crosse through here, bring in the infrastructure so that we can continually provide opportunities here for the public. As Phil talked about, currently, we have in this area cyclocross, a pump track, and a skills course that's being done by volunteer groups that are out of the Ped Bike Committee. As Phil said, we were talking about, in this plan initially, we had some pretty grand stuff going on here. We've minimized that a little bit because we're duplicating services just downriver. So we think it's important to have a restroom here. Additionally, we would pipe in all of the infrastructure necessary, sewer, electric, everything we need for other things, so it's accessible to us in the future, so we could maybe expand and do greater things here at a later date.
And then also, can you point out where the bike trail is going to continue going through that intersection of La Crosse?
So it stays pretty much, doesn't it hug here, Dell? It's just, Phil, through here, like where I'm running it, and right there, and then it goes on.
So it's not going to go on Bellerive, it's not going to go on Bellerive Road, it's going to have its own trail?
As it does currently, yes.
Okay. And then the projects, will they be done simultaneously, Atlas and BLM, or?
That makes good sense because we're mobilized. There's some aspect at the mill site where we want to reclaim some soils there and possibly remove this stuff that Phil talked about, and then create some contouring in there and then overseed it so it's just not flat. There'll just be a little bit more contoured, a little bit more pleasing to the eye. And it helps the mill site because we have some unsuitable soils there that we'd like to get out so we can have a buildable site. So some of this work would go on simultaneously, yes.
Yay. Okay. My tires are aired up, so I'm ready to go.
Thank you.
I have a second thought. We've been hearing traffic studies and for a couple of years about the La Crosse entrance to Riverstone, and tonight we're hearing that there's a gate across the La Crosse entrance.
Okay.
So if someone would explain that to me, please. Thanks.
I might not have done a good job explaining that. This is obviously La Crosse and Northwest Boulevard. The intent is that you continue down the existing roadway. You get to this point, you turn into the parking lot, and the road, there would be a gate here at Bellerive. That was the direction we had received out of the city because I think the intent that this private road not be connected to the public road. The future public road the intent is that it would extend through an existing city right-of-way that's in this Union Pacific property. And then if the developer that owns this property actually subdivides that property, he would put in the remainder of the road. So the public route on public road right-of-way would come down like this. In the future phase, it would continue on that way, connect to Lakewood. That's Lakewood right there. It's kind of just off the screen. And then it would continue on to Beebe in that direction. I'm not sure if this outlet was intended to be gated from the very beginning for Bellerive, that it was a fire access only. I believe that's the case. I'm not certain of that. So Mr. Gady's question is, why is it gated? I believe it's because that was the original intent for this private road, but the future access would be down that direction.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak? Thank you. Well, I guess with that, let's go ahead and close the public comment portion of it and discuss our priority list. Bill's getting it back up on the screen.
Do you need this? Okay.
Go ahead, Mike. Why don't you get us started?
I'll get us started anyway. I'll try to pick up from where we left off, I think, with the Commission Council workshop last Friday, and I'll just kind of recap what I think we got out of that, and then we can bounce that around. I've added a couple things, and I'll mention those as I go through. But the Clean and Green is the piece that's already funded, and that's kind of our base, if you will. So that's there. We've got, and then this is kind of those optional amenities that were on the $2.8 million list, so to speak. The ones that I would consider, and I'm kind of looking at this as a first priority, those are the things that we probably should move ahead with as part of the initial project. A number 2 priority would be those things that would be good to add as soon as funds are available, if they're not available right away. And a number 3 would be something that requires some additional study and/or analysis, and that may or may not come to fruition, so to speak.
But would they be low priority as far as funding for the initial
Yes,
phase of
they'd be
construction?
the lowest priority.
Okay, 1, 2, and 3.
And if anybody would like to approach it differently, I'd be certainly entertain that. I'm just trying to keep it simple. So as I go through these, I see a $65,000 price tag associated with the dog park. I see that as a number 1 priority. I see the accessible beach as a $650,000 item as a number 1 priority. The kayak launch at same thing, a number 1 priority at $250,000. The playground, and I guess this could go 1 or 2. I still feel like if we're going to have a park, it's kind of hard to have one without a playground. So I would like to put it on the number 1 priority list, open for discussion there. The water feature, again, that would be nice, but I think that probably is when you're comparing that to maybe 1 beach access or something of that nature, I think it has to fall off the priority. So I'd give that a 3. The added river access, and I'm kind of debating this one. We got $1.3 million there, but we've got 4 access points that we're getting for that, and they're pretty darn nice. And so I would look at that as either a 1 or a /2 if there isn't enough to put it into the 1 category.
Can I add to that, in that we could just have one of them at $40,000?
Yeah, or whatever the numbers are,
I mean,
yeah.
we don't have to buy the whole thing.
I have a question on that, though.
Sure.
If we don't buy the whole thing right now, what's the cost to go back and try to do it later?
My guess is we probably would not go back and do it later, primarily because I think probably the picture is worth the words here. You can just envision, I went the wrong direction, I apologize. When we move in to do that work, particularly one like, for instance, that one, this will get vegetated, and the work can be done during low water, because you can imagine a piece of equipment sitting here. It's easier to do it from up above. So, but in the future, that up above will have turf on it or have natural landscaping on it and an irrigation system. Certainly one like this is a substantial piece of work. So if we don't do the steps in this area here, we'll simply lay the slopes back, vegetate them, and again, to go in there and remove that vegetation and do it, we'd end up tearing a lot of the upland park area up. You can imagine tearing a bunch of the pedestrian path and whatnot.
That's
So
what I'm concerned about, is
Yeah.
doing it later will destroy what we paid for in the first place.
Right.
Well, it kind of goes back to 2 other things on that particular additional pedestrian access, is that was a common theme that we've heard through all the public input process we've had, is being able to have waterfront access. That certainly just enhances it that much more. And second of all, under the lean and green concept, a considerable amount of that money is being invested in the shoreline stabilization portion of the work. And so I see the additional pedestrian access work as those construction elements that help protect that investment. Because like you said, if you did kind of the minimalist approach with vegetating the embankments, people are still going to find their trails or make their trails to the water. And I think by putting these kind of elements in there, it's just going to protect that investment you've already made there and keep it a lot lower maintenance item through time.
because we're directing the community where to go with a hardscape. And if they have a choice to go down the brushy path or go down the hardscape, they'll probably choose the hardscape.
Well, and, the amenities there won't be a lot of amenities in this park. It's just not designed that way for, like we have in McEwen. What the amenities are is access to the water. So I see that as a number 1. And
Yeah.
you're spot on.
Yeah,
number
and
1.
I guess it sounds to me like that's in the number 1 list.
I might ask
Brought the discussion out.
Yeah,
That's
no, I
good.
think that's good.
I might ask the commission if you, and it might be a little bit of a challenge, but when the ones that we have shown, and Councilmember McEvers had asked this question, if there were dollars not associated with these, remember he said, if there were dollars not associated, which would you pick? And I guess I might ask that same question if, thinking about the water accesses, this is one that's near the commercial area. How would that rank if we did have to split out the 3 or 4? Would this be number 1 or would it be number 3? Compared to smaller ones like this, is this one number 1 or is it number 3? This is, we might call this, in downtown parlance, we would call this the 100% corner. And I think Dell and I would share that this is a really spectacular opportunity to do something really special here.
For me, that one that you're showing right there would be the first and probably the best that we could do. I'm not sure I would place a greater or lesser priority on any of the other 3, however.
That's probably going to come out in the budgetary process once you have construction docs done.
Okay.
Would be my guess, but I think kind of, in general, I think, we're kind of in consensus with what you've started there. So why don't you go ahead and keep going.
Well, I'll just kind of tick through the rest of these as quickly as possible here. The trail tunnel, I think, is probably, unfortunately, it would be a real nice amenity, but I'm thinking that's fallen down to the 3 priority line. The one thing that I move off of the additional other items is the park maintenance building. I don't think we can build a park and not have something to store our apparatus that we need to maintain the park. So I would move that up above the line and make that a 1 priority as well. Food truck area and the police vendor building, I think those fall into a 2 priority. I still think they're important. If we can get the money, I think it would be great to have them. The docks, I think, based on all the discussion we've had so far, I think there's a lot more conversation needs to happen before we can, if we ever move forward with those. So I'd put those into a 3 priority. And I mean all of the docks in that discussion, other than maybe the kayak handicapped accessible dock. And then on the other side of the ticket, when we start looking at the BLM, right now, I guess I don't know how much we have to work with, so it's kind of tough to really ferret through this. It'd be nice to do more, but I'd like to see that all of the number 1s hopefully can move forward. So if we did the lacrosse extension along with the smaller version of the parking lot, I think we're looking at about 1.17 million. So I would probably add that. If we put all the number 1s together, I think with the clean and green, we're talking at $7.125 million, if my math is correct. And
Commissioner McNally, the number that we had, Ignite had estimated may be available is 7.5 million, and that's for not including the clean and green. The clean and green is already funded.
whoa.
And again, this is, yeah, but that.
That helps with the 2s.
There's more, remember that there's more potential projects within the Lake District.
Right.
And there's a bunch of economic
just these
analysis.
things.
Yeah, it's not just these
That's
things.
correct.
But what Mayor Widmeyer had asked is that the Parks and Rec Commission weigh in on parks-related facilities. Of course, the council has other considerations, and Ignite Board does as well.
Well, we certainly could look at the other BLM corridor projects as well. I can't see, other than the food truck area and the police vendor building on the Atlas list, if we can fund those, that would be wonderful. But then I think before we move to anything else, I'd want to see where we're at with the other BLM.
That was our attempt here to do a running total where you can see the priority here.
Okay.
We have a running total, and the Atlas is at 2.7. And again, these numbers are, and then we started adding in the lacrosse signal that takes you to 3.6.
Okay.
The parking lot, 3.89, and so on.
Okay.
Oh, I see.
Down through here. And that was the reason we put in the running total in this location.
Okay.
So I think up here we've captured all of your 1s and 2s. I didn't hear this, I heard you say not the underpass at Suzanne, but that would require we put in a
Oh,
trail
yeah.
crossing
Yeah,
there.
yeah, I
And
understand.
You could, just to be clear, that 100,000 is to put in a very good trail crossing, and it's not just the trail, but it's the car approach too, because remember, we're trying to educate the car drivers, not like at Golf Course Road.
Right.
Because, you know, at Golf Course Road, we all kind of.
We run for it. That's
Yeah,
what
you're
we
running
do.
for it. And so Suzanne would have some features on it that would signal folks, it'd just slow folks down in the car.
Commissioner McDowell, did you state that you did not want to see that this, in this category, the food truck? Did you move that down? Or did you leave it in
Well, I saw
here?
that as a two priority as compared to the other items.
Okay.
But if we've got funding available, I would have no problem adding that to the list.
So it sounds like this list that is what I think was compiled after Friday's meeting is pretty accurate today?
Okay?
Phil, the way your cost summary is listed, priorities 1 through 9, you've actually ranked all those highest number 1 to lower number 9 versus kind of the group
Yeah.
I think what if.
1, 2, or 3 priority.
That's correct, but I think what I hear the Commissioner McDowell saying is we might I might reorganize 6, 7, maybe not. Those might be in the correct priority, just in that
Right.
class 1, we might call it.
Wasn't the park maintenance building a 1?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's in this, we'll call this level 1 right up here. It's just,
The food truck? I thought that was a 2.
That's where I'd put that, yes.
Food truck.
But that's open
yeah.
for discussion.
But I think what I can do is I can take and I can split this apart and follow, if the commission is saying that you want to follow the outline that Commissioner McDowell put together, I'll break it out this way in our next presentation, because I'm actually intending to take this on the 20th, which is Wednesday, when I brief the Ignite board on kind of where we're at in the project. I'd like to bring this forward, because it gives them opportunity to think about this thing in advance of the meeting on the 28th, so.
Well, Phil, you've got a good document here, and with whatever tweaks the commission would like to see, I think what we'd like to do, so that we're very concise in our motion and recommendation to council, is that we use as an exhibit to that recommendation, so it's very clear
Okay.
where we saw the priorities. Does everybody agree?
Yes. Is somebody recording what our
Well-
good commissioner here said in terms of the numbers?
Just one comment. Phil, from my perspective, having served on the council, I think if we give them all kinds of different numbers there, it tends to open debate. And while that's healthy, and I don't, I'm not necessarily trying to discourage that, I would prefer to see all of those as a 1 priority, maybe, or as the commission decides, maybe 1 or 2 of those as a 2 priority, but they're still in the top list.
Yeah, I like that, the grouping.
But I just see the 1 priority, the 2 priority, and the 3 priority.
Okay. So earlier you had said the food truck and the vendor building were a 2 priority. Is that still the objective? Is that the vendor building and the food truck area are 2 priority?
Well, I guess I was thinking we had a little less money, but I'd be open for discussion on that. If we've got the funding to do it, and I think it's very helpful for the overall project success, I think it'd be, if we can do it, I'd like to see it as a 1.
Yeah, I'd like to see it as a 1, and the reason being is, once again, we've got to have some revenue coming in to pay for maintenance. I don't even know how many people you'll have to hire for this additional maintenance, Bill, because we're not only bringing on an entire huge park,
So
but you have so many
a month ago, I
other,
thought a couple, but as we continue to discuss this, the number's increasing.
right? Yeah. And so I think that food truck area and the vendors is revenue. And it also adds vibrance to the park. So if possible, I'd
Yeah.
like to see it as a 1.
Okay?
So I guess to kind of tweak what our priority list is, the first section would be maybe repeating how you presented it, is definition of what you'd see the 1 priority being. That should be funded as part of the initial park construction,
Right.
waterfront construction.
I'm sorry, but do you mean all those items are 1s under Atlas Waterfront? Is that what you're saying?
Well, following what Mike has suggested, instead of ranking them individually, you're grouping them
Right.
1, 2, or 3.
Correct. Okay. You were talking about how to
But I
organize.
think it's important to also put a good description of what number 1 means, what number 2 means, and what number
Oh,
3
I
means
see
as
what you're
far
saying.
as
Yes,
our considerations.
yep. Can I ask, and maybe I didn't hear you correctly, but I feel like there's an interpretation here that all of a sudden we have a lot more money than, and I just know that I've heard at our Friday meeting that there are other projects besides these
Well,
that
well, I-
money is competing against.
What I think the cost of things is important considerations as we do our priorities or our ranking of elements for the park. It's not this group that's going to be
Agreed.
putting the dollars together. That's really going to be in the arena of the council and at Night Coeur d'Alene coming up with the
I
funding
agree.
of the project. So what I'd like to see is, from a parks perspective, what are those elements that should be
Yep.
part of the initial park construction, and what are those elements that could be phased in?
I like Woody's point of view on Friday, that we take the money out of it, and what do we think is
He
important?
just took it
Well,
off.
I think- Bridget, I think what we've tried to capture here is getting the main infrastructure in place while it's the least expensive to construct it.
Yeah. Yeah. But you're right, what Woody said made sense.
Do you mean the infrastructure from the clean and green part?
Well, the clean and green, but what you don't want to do is have your phasing completely out of line. So you want to make sure that you get your riverfront access, water access in place before you have to tear it up to bring it in later, because that just won't happen. It costs twice as much, and it's never right the second time.
I agree.
So I'm looking at it like an infrastructure phasing progress. You can always go back if they decide, okay, we're not going to put the playground in today. That's easily put in later.
Yes.
Although I always like to see parks have playgrounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we've kind of, as a group, come to clarity on what we'd like to see as priorities on the Atlas Mill waterfront spaces. So kind of going back to the BLM now, there is obviously one that kind of rose to the top as being top priority, is the lacrosse extension and parking lot with its utilities with that. So I guess, how do we portray that in relation to the Atlas Mill features? I mean, do they get lumped into the same priority 1 list, or are we still looking at those as two kind of separate?
I think that
Projects.
that's up to the commission. I will pass on to you what I have heard from the mayor and a number of council members, is that they are focused that in their, and this is individual council members and the mayor, the number 1 priority is Atlas. And they envision that is where we want to initially spend the money. There's good reasons to spend money in lacrosse, because it can generate economic development in the neighborhood next door, the whole, the proximity principle to parks. And so I think I would leave that up to the commission. That's what I had heard out of the mayor and a few council people, is Atlas is the number 1 priority, but they also appreciated and understood why it would be important to fund something in lacrosse, because it can stimulate private investment in that area, not just through the UP or the active west parcel, but even in the neighborhood next door, just to the north.
Well, that does lie in the mission of Ignite. When they take on a project, they are supposed to generate economic development. So I understand why they're asking us to take a look at that. I would defer to my other commissioners on what, I mean, the road that would be paid for by the urban renewal dollars, or is that
Correct.
somewhere? So it seems like we have to start with infrastructure, like Ginny said, and focus on the road and the parking lot in.
Well, this, as a suggestion, could be kind of the form of a motion or a recommendation, is that you present all the items in what you'd like to see as priorities as far as the Atlas Mill project goes, and then kind of the second part of that is if there's going to be any development on the BLM corridor, this group sees the lacrosse and parking lot project as being the top priority, something like that.
Great.
So
You've made
Commissioners,
that
may
distinction.
I remind everybody, we do not have an action item on our agenda this evening. So I suggest you probably do not make a motion. But what you are doing is you're creating a list that we're going to move forward, and I'll take it forward in a memo sort of way for council and Ignite to review. So we left that off because we weren't certain how this was going to go. And so we want to stay within the rules that are before us. And since it was not an action item,
Yep.
we have received information from the public. We're making changes on those, some good ideas we got today. But we'll just put this together in a memo form that will move forward. And again, Phil just said he's presenting this Wednesday, yes?
To the Ignite Board, is it just an update?
Yeah, it's an update. So he may interweave his presentation with these priorities that you've already talked about. But that's what we'll do. We'll just do it as a list. Now, the question was about what you want to do with the lacrosse. Are you going to call the first chunk up top all number ones that you want? And then do you want to call lacrosse a second piece as a number one, as its own number one?
Right.
Yes.
And then anything that falls off, all that drops down into the bottom category?
No,
No, okay.
because
So-
now you only have 1 and 2.
Well, I don't know if it's important to have 1 or 2 or 3, but what I'm getting at is if you wanted to say, the top one is number one, the second one, everything that Phil's saying is absolutely spot on in relationship to economic development. So lacrosse piece is, I think, kind of critical, and Commissioner Wood just talked about that. So if you want to call, I just saw it as a separate element in the BLM corridor. If you want to call that one 2 and the final one 3,
I guess, from my perspective, Mr. Chairman, I would see, as you described, the first group easily could be the one
Yes.
for Atlas. The parking lot and the road access at La Crosse, number 1 for the BLM property, possibly, and I'd like to maybe hear from you what you think about the picnic shelter restroom there maybe at that location as well.
I think that would be critical, Commissioner, only because we're bringing people into a facility and we're not into an area to
Right.
recreate, and we don't have a facility for them.
I agree.
So I would think that maybe that could be added. The other items in the BLM group, I would see clearly as a number 2, whereas the ones in the last group as a number 3. I would like to distinguish between those two.
And so within this lacrosse piece, Commissioner, are all of these things that you think that you want to see that's that 1 through 6?
No.
No.
No, I
1
would
and
see
2.
1, 2, and
Nick Shelter,
4
yeah.
as being the number 1, all the others being the number 2, and then the balance below
Okay.
in the
see.
last group would be number 3, is the way I would see it.
Did you get that, Phil?
Yep.
And I certainly entertain any.
So one of the things that I would need to bring to your attention, and that's the site and dry land native grasses. The way the project's unfolding, we used to have that piece, and it's not the Mount Hink site, it's the other one just west of that.
Correct. We call it Phase 4, but that's not included in this one.
That's not that piece?
No, because
Good.
it's, yeah,
Okay.
the,
Excellent.
Yep, there's a opportunity, this might be one more detail than you want, but it'll give you a complete picture. This parcel right here has unsuitable soils underneath it, and they need to go somewhere. They're unsuitable for structural purposes, but they have organic elements to them that would make them nice for contouring a park, like at La Crosse.
The old sawdust piles?
It's a mixture of bark and wood and topsoils. The route to move this material down in an old railroad grade makes it very efficient to pick it up from here, haul it to the La Crosse site, and contour it into a nice shape. It's very cost-effective to remove it from here. What happens here is the Ignite/City project gets a cost-effective removal of material. What happens at the La Crosse site is it gets a nice contour. So instead of being flat, you can imagine some rolling hills into it with a gravel path that goes to the top. It gives you a little better view to the river, really a more appealing aesthetic in that area. The reason that that's not in here is because it's driven by kind of a non-park related thought. Other than, I think the commission would agree that it would be nicer to have a rolling park as opposed to a flat park in this particular area. What Bill did talk about, the removing of the gravel and the weeds and planting native grasses, that's what that line item in the list was to go in here and just spruce up that area. So rather than having that, and putting it into a condition that Bill can maintain, he couldn't go out there and mow that now if he wanted to without destroying a mower. We would put it into a condition that he could actually maintain it and mow the grasses a couple times a year. And that's what the intent is of this number down here, that 390,000.
So Phil, that goes back to what Ginny's saying, when you prioritize, if you're doing a project now and you have the backfill, just get it done, use what you have. Don't recreate it later. So I think we have to throw it in as one of the priorities.
Okay, do we need to summarize one more time then, so we're clear?
Sure.
I've seen a head nod there, so.
We have three groups. We have the one group, the two group, and the three group. And the one group is our top priority, and it includes possibly things from all three areas: Atlas, La Crosse, and secondary Atlas.
Well, I think let's just keep BLM and Atlas separate, and we can
Okay.
prioritize those separately, because they're two different animals.
Okay.
So, starting with Atlas, then I guess we're not going to rank them 1 through 9. We're going to just group them together as top priority 1 items.
Right.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Mike, or
Does that
go
include-
ahead and list them off.
Does that include Suzanne Trail Crossing?
Yes.
Yes,
The at-grade Suzanne Trail.
not the
Right.
tunnel. but-
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what Phil has listed in those 1 through 9 items, is there an item there that doesn't belong as a priority 1 item for Atlas?
I think that's the list.
I see it as priority 1.
Okay, what are the priority 2 items for Atlas?
Actually, I don't think we
There
have
were
any
no
left.
twos, they were all threes.
We've got some 3s. I don't see any other 2s.
Okay. Then the 3s are,
The
Yeah.
docks and the tunnel.
And the
water feature.
Yeah.
okay,
Can I ask about the day use docks? I got the impression, first of all, I believe we were told that they are approached by water. They don't need parking lots.
That's correct.
And they are also removable when the season is over?
The design of those were such that they would not ground, so they would not hit the lake bottom and rack, as Phil had said. So they would stay afloat
Okay,
in the winter.
I know there's concern about them during the winter getting hammered or something, but I am curious if day use docks is a completely different issue than the marina docks.
Yeah, good point. Those should be separated for discussion. The day use is going to really feed right into that commercial area that we're all anxious to go visit. And so I think we talked last Friday that maybe it didn't need to be, I can't remember if you have 40 slips there. Maybe we could start with 20 slips or
This-
12
this-
slips.
Yeah, this one here is 2 rows of 13.
26.
So,
Yeah, one.
Smaller.
Yes, and then this one has 42 there and 12 right here.
so we didn't want those to drop totally off forever. They're down on number 3, but I think what we talked about Friday and the council talked about was let's do some research.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll bump back up.
I'd put them on
And
a
I think
2.
that's what 3
Yeah.
means.
I put it at a 2.
The day, Commissioner Hill, that day use docks.
The day
Day
use.
use,
Day
yeah.
use.
And not the larger one downriver, okay?
Those could be, and the reason I would go with it too as well is because people are going to want to access that commercial spot
Yeah.
via their boat throughout the day, and just, if you just have a few docks there for day use only, I don't think that's going to cause too much congestion. But that's what the study will tell us, so.
And I think we had a comment from the public about concerns about the docks. It may have been mostly in relation to parking.
Yeah, and that was farther down.
Right.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Could you live with it too?
I'm a little bit concerned about some of the council comments that we heard about docks in general. I think Woody talked about the cost for maintenance and things like that that need to be just ferreted out, I think, further. And so I think putting them in a two, I think that would tend to elevate them to a level that we're talking about for the additional BLM corridor features, and I don't think it rises to that level. I think it needs to come after that.
I see what you're saying. But it doesn't fall off, it just gets researched.
Yeah, I mean, it's not my intention to disregard it, it's just to properly categorize it.
Can you talk about or clarify Jenny's issue about Phase 2 doesn't really ever happen? What would it take to bring on day-use docks the way it's designed right now?
I think it would be, that portion would be easier than others. And the reason for that is that the infrastructure, I think Phil spoke to this, the ability to hook a gangway to an overlook that he talked about, and we're going to bring that in through the waterway anyway, so we're not going to disturb the park in itself. If we put the pieces in place for those gangways and then later float the docks in and connect to that existing piece that we put in place with the project, the impact to the existing park is minimized tremendously.
Either way, we don't need the docks right now because we don't have the commercial piece up and running, so.
Well, and absolutely. And the other part of this is the docks themselves have to be permitted. So that's a whole nother process.
Sure.
And, you know, we're looking for, I guess, guidance so that in the future, we can certainly go that direction. But we still have to reach out to BLM, and we still have to find the funding, and there's some other pieces that go along with that.
Yep.
So they would be a little ways out, but I don't know how quickly those permits turn around. I have one in right now for Harbor Center that's taken a little bit longer than I expected for some riparian rights that we have there. So maybe Phil's better at this than I am and can you know, twist a few arms to get things moving quicker. But yeah, so if you wanted to rank them separately, Commissioner McDowell's concern is valid. But again, Councilman McNevers talked about not looking at the numbers.
Yeah.
And this is really about what you as commissioners for the Park and Recreations and for our community really think you should have, or we should have in our community.
There are a lot of boats on the water. The water gets used a lot in the summer.
Right, we live on a lake.
So
People like to have boats.
I guess one thought I have on the docks next to the commercial lot is that it does allow a boat to dock for a few minutes in case they need to visit the public restroom.
Well, and you all remember, some of you weren't here in 2000, but when we built the mooring docks here at McEwen, that was one of the reasons that we saw that as an opportunity for people to do exactly that. Come to town, have a bite to eat, you know, motor in from their lake property and get to town. And then get some stuff flowing in downtown, his whole idea. And this is very similar to that. And again, I too, Commissioner Hill, heard there was some concern about conflict of boat trailers. There's no launching here.
Exactly.
All the access is through the waterway. And it would be people bringing their boats, their vessels through the river, mooring at that location. Additionally, this smaller piece that you're interested in is that commercial piece where it's going to help us relieve some pressure here at our 3rd Street launch and additionally gain us some revenue.
It may not happen right away. I mean, there are a lot of
Understood.
permits exactly, you know.
Well, a couple of things. I think everybody came to agreement that the docks in general warranted further discussion and study. I think the dock elements of this park don't have the sense of urgency that the other features do, so it allows you a little bit of time. But what I am hearing is if you're kind of quantifying the docks in general, that the day-use dock would have a little higher priority based on its relationship and use with the park.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I think that's the difference.
Can that be-
I think that
Can
makes
that be
sense.
related
Yeah.
like that?
Chairman Cranston, I might just ask if are we talking about just the day use portion of that 26-slip dock, or are we talking about the day use and the vendor portion? Are they separate?
The day use and the vendor?
Yeah, so if you just think of this dock here, this element right here might be the day use.
Okay,
And so you pull up, you're out there, and you pull in, you go up and you have a glass of water and use the facilities. This section here could be the vendor docks, and those are where the rental company, where Bill puts out to bid that arm, and a rental company comes in and.
yeah, skidoos, or,
Or just dock, or just.
So that's one of
no.
those things that could be phased,
It could be, it could be.
to see
yeah.
how it goes. But Scott
It's a
had a
revenue
good
stream, yeah.
point that all the boats are going right down Government Way right now. They are looking for a place.
And I think that when we start zooming out a little bit from a perspective of, we might create slightly more congestion here, but we substantially reduce congestion on Government Way and at the Third Street launch.
right.
Yeah.
So there's probably a couple of questions in there.
Yeah, and I guess it's all going to come out with the discussion of docks when
We better do a study.
at a future time, but I think we were thinking of as just the function and the idea of a day-use dock and how it relates specifically to the park, where vendor docks, I don't see it having that relationship. Vendor docks need to have access to parking and where the companies can meet their customers. So
Yeah.
that's how I would distinguish
Okay,
it.
Yep.
that's helpful. And just one more point of clarity for me. This obviously is, just listening to you is a high priority. The ones on the west end of the site are pretty low down the list.
Yeah.
Before we leave Atlas, I think another priority that the city should view is, if this is going to council in kind of memo form, is that wastewater brought out a good point in our workshop regarding that the water rights with this property can transfer to the city Coeur d'Alene in order to pull irrigation from the river. And I think that's something I would recommend the city to pursue.
Absolutely.
That's always been
Because
high on our
there's
priority. Terry and I have been talking about it for some time. Phil and I have talked about it a bunch, and even how that design's going to work. It's similar to the one that we are using right now at Independence Point. So I agree with you. It's a great resource that we can't let slip away.
I know you have a limited window here, so I'd just like to, urge council to
Good. Thank
direct
you.
staff to follow through with that.
Yep, I would second that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, are we done with Atlas?
So-
Going to BLM.
Okay.
Priority one items.
Priority one items I would suggest for consideration would be the La Crosse Road access, the smaller version of the parking lot, and the picnic shelter / restroom facility.
And if I could add on, the vegetation that's required that they would take out of Atlas and put into La
Okay.
Crosse.
Was that part? Or I thought that was,
Yeah,
Well, that's separate.
Well, the number 3 here, the site remediation and the dryland native grasses, if you just envision what's out there now.
Yeah.
What number 3 would do would go out there and essentially clean that up and put it into a condition that Bill can mow. It would still be flat, but Bill could maintain it, as opposed to right now, you're going to put a parking lot there, you're going to put a restroom there, but the knapweed and the rocks that are there are going to remain. So the idea would be number 3 would clean that up. As a separate consideration, and I didn't put it on this because it's really kind of an Ignite probably question, city council question, is do you want to take material from Phase 4?
Oh, I see.
And bring it here and contour it? I think, and maybe I was being presumptuous, I just assumed that the commission would rather see a rolling park than a flat park. The question here is, I guess, is number 3 on this list into Commissioner McDowell's number 1 category, or is it a number 2
Site
category?
remediation?
The site remediation.
I would think it would be a number 1 for me. I mean, you don't want to have just a bunch of weeds that you can't maintain out there.
I wouldn't think so, but
Yeah.
Bill might have a different opinion.
Is that number associated with that? Do you think that's pretty accurate?
It was a number that we had pulled off of, this is a conservative number.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
It is a
yeah,
big number.
yeah.
Okay.
Just because we went and looked at the acreage that we have to manipulate there.
Okay.
And we're planning on importing some topsoil in there too.
Yeah.
Would we need to do that even though we might be able to pull that stuff out of?
No, and that's where it starts to get a little bit more complicated.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts into this, and I've simplified some of it.
All right.
Phil, building a road and theoretically a parking lot there and potentially a restroom and shelter before anything else gets developed around it that looks like park or play fields or, those spaces. If we do kind of the native vegetation and do some of that remediation, is that going to satisfy the ordinance requirements for landscape buffering around a parking lot? I mean, can you make that stretch to see, would justify that?
I'd love to, but I'm sure planning wouldn't allow me to get away with that. I don't think so. We'll still have some, let me get this off of here. You can see around the number of trees that are around here and the landscape islands in there. We're going to have to do that as part of the parking lot project. Those costs are in that parking lot number.
Okay.
What I'm talking about, the site remediation, is really just outside of this, cleaning up the area. And you can envision that and Bill and I had talked through this, we're prepping this site to receive micro soccer in the future. So it's getting kind of leveled out. It's going to have some dryland grass seed, no irrigation on it. So then when the funding does come along, it's a matter of going in and just getting rid of that top dressing it, putting in an irrigation system in. You're not far off. So you're setting the bones up here, you'd obviously have to strip the organics off because you're going to put a hard surface on it. But that was the idea of doing it in a dryland grass way where you're not making a gigantic investment, but you're putting it in a condition that Bill can maintain. And when folks go out there, it actually looks like it's a usable public space, maybe with a gravel trail going through it, maybe not. But you could go out there and, throw the ball with your, well, I guess maybe you can't do that with your dog in the park. I shouldn't promote that, sorry. Off leash.
Okay.
Okay. I can't get away from the price tag associated with that.
It's a big area.
Yes, it is.
How many acres are we talking about?
I can't remember how many it is.
17?
No, not in that area. It's, I don't remember. Remember, the numbers we've put in here we're conservatively approaching it because we don't know exactly what's in there. So we're assuming that we're going to go in and we're going to strip the top 12 inches off of the whole site. And that's why we have conservative numbers in like that.
Okay. Just, Phil, for my benefit and for the commission, when you say conservative, you're really meaning you're estimating on the high side.
Correct, yep. I'm
Okay.
sorry. Yeah.
Conservative sometimes
Yeah.
can mean something different
You're
than
right,
that.
thank you for the clarity. I should have done
Those
that.
numbers
but-
are ishy.
Yeah, yeah. And you kind of forced into it at this level to do it that way. And so you take a large area and you assume you're going to go in and strip it, and then you assume you're going to come in and put quart of green on it, and
Yeah.
that's the idea. But that's probably not necessary there, but we just don't know.
Right.
So if we were to look at a priority to make it usable, but not anything we would call a finished park, you would need the road, the parking lot, and then, did you say the picnic shelter?
Yeah.
The restroom.
Restroom.
Picnic shelter.
Sounds like the site remediation would be nice to do, but I don't know if it makes sense to do it now or not. Seems like some of these decisions, because they're financial decisions, Ignite will decide, but for us, what would we like to see in a semi-park?
Bill, why don't you weigh on that from a parks maintenance point of view?
So we can maintain it as it is, but not as well as I think there might be an expectation at the end of the day when we spent this kind of money, put a parking lot and then put a restroom facility with a picnic shelter and just left it in the condition that it's in now. Because our idea is to make this accessible open space that is not maintained turf, but just native grasses, with a path possibly going to a future gazebo. So the conduit could be in place, underground, at a spot that we stub out that we don't want to do the gazebo. the extra gazebo, but the one gazebo would be the restroom facility with an awning on it or an overhang similar to the Atlas site. There's talk about having one further down between there and the bridge at 95 that might be a little bit more elevated for people to have a nice view of the river. We heard that, and you referenced that a bunch about what people wanted to see. And one of the things was they wanted even natural open space and still access to the river. This is not access because it's too steep there, but it certainly gives you a chance to reflect and just kind of chill out and have a nice spot to look at the water. So the dry land that goes in there, like I say, we could maintain it the way we are today, but the expectation, I'm afraid, I would get bit pretty hard by the condition that it looks.
So site remediation.
So I put it in, I put it in the one group.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Anything
I'm good
else?
with that.
Well, Bill, Phil, does that give you kind of what you need to take back to?
I'm feeling very comfortable with what
Meeting on
you've
Wednesday?
decided here tonight. I think that the process has been good. We've heard from the public again today, and we'll make those adjustments. I think before we move this to show some of this information to Ignite, tomorrow we could probably email this out to you guys and
That
make
would be
certain
nice.
it's
Appreciate
all
that.
Yeah.
what we've captured and correct us if we're wrong and let us know quickly because Phil's got to turn that around fast to get ready for Wednesday's meeting.
Sounds good.
And on
You can get it
Wednesday's
out
meeting,
to us tomorrow, we'll get it
Okay,
feedback right away.
excellent.
And just to
Mr.
clarify,
Chair, would
the-
it be, is it the April 15th meeting that we will make an official to the council, these are our priorities? Is that, because at some point we need to do that, right?
Well, that's what this is.
But
Yeah,
there's
except
no
we're not-
action item.
No.
No, because again, I didn't, for legal reasons about Robert's rules, we can't really do an action. It's not on the agenda, but certainly you've been given direction on Friday from council that they want a priority list from you. And that's what we're going to give them. So you'll review that tomorrow, and that same list will be presented to Ignite. They'll have a chance to see it. I'll even ask around and see about, how quickly we get that out to council as well. But that will be, what you review tomorrow is what will be pushed forward to council and the Ignite board.
Okay.
Excellent.
And that doesn't have to be an action item.
No, because council is ultimately the folks that are going to make the decision with Ignite. So again, you guys are advisory. It's
Sure.
okay that it's not in a form of a motion.
Okay.
This list, this priority list that they asked for on Friday will do exactly what they asked you to do.
Okay.
So this, in a sense, is kind of clearing our desk and moving on.
It's not going to, what's the other committee? That usually are,
Oh, the general services.
it's not going to
Committee?
general services.
No.
No.
Got it. I think that's correct.
Okay.
I
Any other
think because it
discussion
won't
on
go to
the-
general service, excuse me, real quickly, is because you had that workshop with council, and the
I
folks
see.
that are on general services are on council.
Yep.
So I think it's a fair assumption we can take this directly to council during that workshop they're having with Ignite.
Okay.
Any other comments on the subject? Any other comments or announcements before I give a few meeting announcements? No. Phil, Dell, thank you very much for your efforts on this.
Yeah, thank you.
Tremendous job. I want to thank the community for their participation in this and getting involved. And thanks for all your considerations and wisdom. So with that said, I would like to go ahead and make a couple of upcoming meeting announcements. Tuesday, April 2nd, 11:30 a.m. at Caruso's Deli here in Coeur d'Alene will be our next scheduled workshop. Following that, on Monday, April 15th, right here in the community library room, 5:30 p.m. will be our next regular monthly meeting. So with that, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Meeting's been motioned to adjourn by Commissioner McDowell and seconded by Commissioner Kennard. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.